Renathal's been nerfed. Hearthstone is Hearthstone once again. The name of the game is going to be 30 card decks. I'm Uncorrupt, and I've got 5 decks to help you get started in this post-Renathal Nerf meta. So before we get started going over the decks, just one quick thing about Renathal itself. That card is likely going to be gone from the meta. My expectation is that mostly what we're going to be facing out on the ladder now is going to be 30 card, 30 health decks. Although Renathal is still going to make an appearance in any kind of deck that's like an attrition deck, a control deck with no real win condition. So you would expect to see Renathal in things like Control Priest, as well as Control Blood Decay. Outside of that, probably not going to be all that prevalent in the meta. Right off the bat, we're taking a look at Evolve Shaman here. Evolve Shaman was already starting to see some play prior to the Renathal nerf. Now it should be even better. This deck is, of course, going to be running the Convincing Disguises, Primordial Waves, as well as the Muck Pools. So we're running all of the Evolve cards. And then we're also running the minions that we want to evolve. Prescient's new card is actually making an appearance in this deck. It's going to allow us to be able to draw some of our higher costed minions. Make sure that we have those in hand. Of course, we're going to be running things like Wildpaw Cavern and Command of Neptulon. The goal of the deck is we really want to be able to get minions out onto the board. We want to be able to take favorable trades with our opponent. And then we want to be able to evolve our minions into something much bigger to be able to threaten our opponent. And you're also going to notice 2 copies of Bloodlust to help us be able to close out the game. In the mulligan for this deck, you're going to want to keep Schooling. You can also keep Muck Pools. You would want to keep Prescient's Wildpaw Cavern, as well as the Goldshire Knoll. Next up, we're taking a look at 30 card Frost Decay. The 40 card version of this deck was starting to make a little bit of noise just prior to the patch. Now, the deck should be significantly better because we're expecting to be facing 30 health decks. And running a 30 card version of this deck ourselves is going to allow us to be able to draw into the damage more consistently, as well as more quickly than the 40 card version. Taking a quick look at the deck here, we're going to be running all of the relevant frost spells, things like Horn of Winter and Glacial Advance. These are going to be mana cheats. Of course, Glacial Advance is also a direct damage spell, Burn, that we can send to our opponent's face. And we're also running the things like Icy Touch, like Howling Blast, and Frostworm's Fury. Again, all just spells that can go into our opponent's face. Game plan for this deck is we want to punch our opponent in the face. As you know, maybe as silly as that sounds with me saying it, this is really a face deck. We want to punch face, not necessarily worry so much about the state of the board. Really just try to burn our opponent out of the game. One card you're going to see here that does not make the cut is Death Chiller. Turns out this card maybe really just not good enough to be in the deck, in a 30 card version of the deck. We're likely going to want to be holding our frost spells so that we can play them all in the same turn to finish our opponent. And so, you know, playing this out on the board, we don't really have a lot of frost spells that we're going to be playing with it as this card gets played to really be able to take advantage of the text on the card. And of course, you know, if we're not using the text on the card, this is really just a River Crocolisk, not good enough to belong in this deck. Another key facet of the deck here is going to be the Rimefang Sword. We're going to be able to discount our frost spells with Burn. Again, it's just mana cheat. We're also including, of course, Lady Death Whisper, because being able to copy all of the frost spells in our hand is going to allow us to copy Burn that's in our hand. And then, of course, we're also going to be running Guild Traders, again, just for the spell damage. Also, Thalnos here, another spell damage option. So ideally, the final turn of the game, we're going to be playing out something like a Guild Trader or a Thalnos. Hopefully, we're able to play multiple copies of Glacial Advance, keeping in mind that we could copy additional copies of this with Lady Death Whisper, or potentially we could create more copies with Frost Strike. But then on that lethal turn, again, Spell Power, Glacial Advance, Horn of Winter, Icy Touch, so on and so forth, being able to kill our opponent. Mulligan for this deck, pretty straightforward. We're going to want to keep Harbinger of Winter and Chill Fallen Baron. You can think about that as the card draw. We would also want to keep Rimefang Sword to be able to start discounting our frost spells. And then you would also want to keep Lady Death Whisper so that when we have a couple of frost spells in our hand, we can play Lady Death Whisper and copy them. One quick note about Lady Death Whisper here. Don't feel like you have to have, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 frost spells in hand to be able to copy with Lady Death Whisper. A lot of times being able to copy just 2 frost spells is going to be good enough. Certainly 3 frost spells going to be more than good enough. Don't try to hold on to this card too long, and there's probably nothing wrong with just playing this out on curve, even if you're only going to copy, you know, 1 to 2 frost spells. Again, even if you just have Glacial Advance in hand, it's going to be worth getting this out and copying that Glacial Advance because it's going to give us more mana on our kill turn. For our third deck, we're taking a look at Aggro Pure Paladin. This is a deck that was around before the Renathal nerfs, and the deck is still the same. It's going to play exactly the same as it was before. Again, we're just expecting it to be a little bit better because the field of decks that we're playing against has changed. So as you take a look at this deck, This is really more of a board-based aggro deck. You're going to notice we have a lot of one-drops here because we want to be able to hit the board early. And then we just kind of curve out relatively low curve deck into our top end, which is actually just the Countess, being able to get those free legendary minions out on the board. A lot of times we'll be able to close out a game if we haven't closed out the game prior to that. Keeping in mind that the light rays we're likely going to be playing for free. They could also potentially be just a little bit bigger because of things like the Alliance Bannerman being able to buff them. Of course, playing the Order in the Court is going to allow us to reorder our deck to be able to draw this top end significantly earlier, or rather guarantee that we're going to be able to draw it. So we can actually potentially put down 2 cheap, really big light rays in a single turn, which kind of works as a way to really be able to close out the game if our opponent can't remove those boards. This deck is going to be pretty straightforward. This is just another aggro face deck. We're going to want to punch our opponents into submission. Keeps for this deck, you would want to keep Sanguine Soldier and Sinful Sous Chef. I would likely also keep the Katori Lightblade. I would keep the Stonehearth Vindicator. And you could consider keeping Buffet Biggin and or Cariel, but only if you already had some early game. I would recommend that you not keep things like Knight of Anointment and Righteous Protector. A lot of times you can bait yourself. You say, well, it's a 1-cost card. It gives me something to do on turn 1. But see, here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep a Knight of Anointment or you're going to keep a Righteous Protector. And then you're going to lose the game because you didn't try to find better cards to be able to keep in your mulligan. And then you're going to say to yourself, man, Uncorrupt baited me into playing a bad deck. I hate Uncorrupt. But that's not what we're trying to do. So you're going to want to keep the good cards like Sous Chef, Sanguine Soldier, Katori Lightblade, so on and so forth, like I just said. Then you're going to be more likely to win those games, and you're going to say, man, I love Uncorrupt. Then you're going to be a lot more likely to sub to his YouTube channel. For our 4th deck, we're actually taking a look at Aggro Mage here. This is actually my personally favorite deck of the 5 decks that I'm presenting to you here. Aggro Mage is a deck that I've loved all the way back since the beginning of Hearthstone, and we've got a little bit of a unique take here, so I'm going to run down the list. We've got a couple of flurries here. So the reason why these are in the deck is because we're really just throwing minions on the deck, and the game plan is we need to be able to get chip damage into our opponents with our early game minions. We really don't want to have to make trades on the board. We want to force our opponent to have to trade into our minions. So we do a bunch of damage face in the earlier turns with our cheaper minions that we're throwing out on the board early. And then later in the game, we're going to be able to win with burn in the form of Arcane Bolts that we're going to be collecting off of Arcane Worm, as well as the Arc Splitter. And then you're going to notice that the deck is also running Frozen Touches. So again, it's going to be burn. It's going to be relatively easy to be able to infuse these Frozen Touches. And that's going to give us the ability to be able to finish our opponents with, 10, 12 damage from hand, possibly even just a little bit more, depending on how the game plays out. You're also going to notice here, Awen the Guardian. This is just a big spell power bonus. If we can actually play this card and it dies, and then draw a cheaper minion, we're then going to have the +2 spell damage attached to a cheaper minion, which is going to make it a lot easier to be able to throw it out on the board and get spell damage again for the Arcane Bolts and Frozen Touches. You're also going to notice in this deck, of course, Trogs. Being able to go wide is nice. It's good against decks that are going to be playing lots of spells in the early game. Shivering Sorceress and Suspicious Alchemist. Again, you're seeing lots of 1-drops here. Suspicious Alchemist also going to be able to generate an extra card for us. One note about this card is you're going to want to be careful about the card that you take. I think you always have to assume that your opponent is going to be able to get the card that you received as well. So you don't want to give your opponent something that's going to be good against what you're trying to do. So for example, if you discover Fire Sale, you probably don't want to take it because we don't want to give our opponent a Fire Sale. So we're looking for something that's going to be useful for us, but maybe just a little bit more important with this card in particular. So we want to be able to find something that's not going to be really good for our opponent to be able to use against us. Also, Amplified Snow Furry in the deck, as well as Astalor Bloodsworn. Blood Mage Thalanos, again, this could be card draw just to be able to get another card in our hand, or it could be spell power, again, to be able to burn our opponent with the spells. Crooked Cook provides just a little bit of extra card draw. Prismatic Elemental, this card is actually really good. What I found with the discovers in this card is you can almost always find something relevant and something good that's going to be able to advance our game plan throughout the early part of the game. Arc Splitters we've already covered, just to be able to get the Arcane Bolts. Frostweave Dungeoneer, just good. Being able to put extra minions on the board, it allows us to be able to not only draw a spell, but also potentially be able to create extra minions on the board in the form of the 1/1s to be able to infuse our Frozen Touches. Cold Cases also going to provide us just with a little bit of healing, but again, it's 2 minions and the Death Rattle that could potentially go face. Commander Savara, again, this is just resource generation. It's going to allow us to be able to get additional copies of spells we've already played in the game. And then you're also going to see Deathborn. So if you can imagine having a wide board with, several Trogs, the Shivering Sorceress, maybe an Amplified Snow Flurry or an Astalor Bloodsworn, you're going to find yourself in a lot of situations where you have this wide board of low health minions, possibly low health minions on your opponent's side of the board, and you play Deathborn, clear the board, get a big board of the skeletons on our side, and it ends up being just really, really good. Again, this is my favorite deck of these 5. Definitely want to encourage you to get out and play it. In the mulligan, what we would want to be looking for here is we would want to keep Amplified Snow Flurry. We could also potentially keep, surprisingly, Crooked Cook has really good stats. You can keep this in your mulligan. We would also keep Prismatic Elemental, Frostweave Dungeoneer, and then I personally like to keep Cold Case. I think those cards are really good. Again, just because you see an Arcane Worm or even an Iron Deep Trog in your hand, do not keep these cards in the mulligan. Throw them back, try to get better cards. Yes, it's a card that you can play on turn 1, but you're actually going to lose games that you could potentially win if you threw these away to get something else. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but all of the stats that I've looked at, plus my personal experience, is telling me do not keep these cards in your opening hand. Last but not least, the final deck is going to be a 30-card version of Thief Rogue. Again, I'm expecting 30-card versions of decks to just be superior. The consistency of only having 30 cards versus 40 cards, I think, is going to be where it's at with this next patch. Not really any surprises here with this deck. It's going to play exactly like you wanted to before. So we're going to want to, really just try to take advantage of the cards that we generate with things like Jackpot, like Reconnaissance, and also potentially the concoctions that we're going to be getting off of Potion Belt and Potion Master Putricide. Pretty much this deck is going to play out exactly like Thief Rogue always has. In the mulligan, we would want to keep a Blackwater Cutlass. You would also keep Jackpot. You can keep Potion Belt. So this one card will discount Wildpaw Knoll by 3. Very important to keep that in mind. And you would also keep Reconnaissance, and you would keep the Wildpaw Knoll itself. So early in the game plan, we're going to want to discount our Knolls and trade our Blackwater Cutlass, again, to discount the Knoll and to be able to discount a cost of a spell in our hand. We're going to play Knolls, and then every game's going to look just a little bit different with this deck based on what we're able to create through Jackpots as well as through Reconnaissance. Then we're going to be closing out the game with our big cards like Shadowcrafter Scabs, replaying cards with Tess Greymane and Contraband Stash, and then, of course, potentially with a Colossal off of Queen Ashara, and also running, of course, Kravatoa just because it is a fantastic rogue card. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're really going to enjoy this next meta now that Renathal has been nerfed. I'm uNCorrupt. Good luck out on the ladder.